A woman once asked Albert Einstein what kind of reading material would prepare her young son for a career as a scientist. Einstein replied without hesitation, fairy tales and more fairy tales, adding that creative imagination is the essential element in the intellectual equipment that makes up a true scientist. Creative imaginations are the essential element to a spiritual life as well. In order to have faith or believe in something, you have to be able to imagine or envision it to be true. You can't believe in something if you can't envision it or imagine it. Those things go hand in hand. So, exercising imagination is extremely important to our intellectual, our psychological, and our spiritual well being. So, what I want to talk to you guys about today is the role that pop culture storytelling has in our lives and how it relates to the scariest cards in the tarot. So, for those who don't know me, my name is Allie. I am a digital fantasy artist as well as a tarot card reader. I've been painting for 10 years now. Well, I've been painting my whole life, but professionally, I've been painting for 10 years. And I've been reading tarot cards for over 2 decades. Now, when I was a kid, I loved mythology. My first introduction to mythology was around the second grade when our class was learning all about the Greek myths. As most myths are connected to some kind of spiritual belief system, mythology led me to an interest in world religions, where I actually went to university to study religion. But I ended up finishing university with a degree in psychology and anthropology. In my spare time, I was practicing tarot, which I had been doing since the age of 12 when I was given my first deck by my mother. And it was tarot that led me to the fairies, which is the subject of my artwork. And that brought me back to folklore and mythology, because fairy mythology is rooted in the Celtic pantheon, where their deities sort of blend. There's sort of this blending of the spirit world, the gods and goddesses, and the fae folk. It's all kind of one intricate world where they're all sort of one and the same. So from a young age, I was always fascinated with the concept of how stories of gods and heroes and other supernatural characters were used to explain the real world in which we live. And we're still doing that, by the way. That's what I'm here to tell you. They've just been replaced by a different medium. We're still using stories to explain how to navigate as human beings in the real world. So comic book heroes, in my opinion, have taken over that role that the ancient gods once had, and they have become sort of our modern day gods and myths. They fulfill that role of supernatural role models. So growing up, a little bit more about my background. When I was growing up, my father was really into science fiction, superheroes, and monster movies. He was a pioneer entrepreneur in the satellite television industry, and he sold his first satellite dish in 1979 for, I think I was told it was around $10,000. So his job that he created for himself was assembling satellite dishes and installing them, repairing receivers, installing receivers, and descramblers. So my mom, on the other hand, was a librarian who was really into fantasy. She was an avid reader. She loved worlds with wizards and dragons, and our house was decorated with statues and figurines of wizards and gargoyles and dragons, which she still has to this day. Now, the first Nintendo Entertainment System came out when I was around 5 years old, and almost everyone owned one, and if you didn't own one, then you knew someone who did. And video games had a huge impact on me and my upbringing and my generation. So, in a nutshell, I was exposed to a lot of technology growing up, with the satellite TV and all these gizmos and gadgets that my dad collected, video games. I had infinite access to television, movies. It was all, and computers later on eventually. But it wasn't just stories. There was a lot of non-fictional and educational program that I was exposed to. There was about 7 years of my childhood where I was obsessed with dinosaurs. I'm a huge dinosaur geek. I don't know if you can even see my shirt right now. And I think it was for a very similar reason that attracted me to mythology and folklore, that attracted me to dinosaurs and fairies and all these different worlds, is that in order to understand the world of dinosaurs or the world of fairies, is that you have to be able to imagine an entirely different world that is still connected and bonded to this world, the world that we live in. So in Western mythology, tales of medieval knights like St. George and the Dragon, or even Smaug from the Hobbit or Lord of the Rings, the Middle Earth mythology by Tolkien, for example, the dragon always guards heaps of treasure. Sometimes young women, young maidens in distress. But the dragon can't make use of either one of these things. He has no use for human females or mounds of coins and jewels and gems and things. He can't make use of these, but he hoards them and he guards them. The dragon's role is to stand in between the hero and the reward. The dragon is a metaphor for the ego. The dragon is the fear that holds us back from having a human experience, or the experience of feeling alive and having purpose. Yoda, Jedi Master, said that fear is the path to the dark side. And we all have dragons in our life. Gamers know about dragons better than anyone. Whether you're a video gamer or an RPG player, you know that dragons are one of the most difficult opponents you'll ever face. There's a quote by Neil Gaiman that I just love, and he says, "Fairy tales are more than true. Not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be defeated." I love it. Dragons can and should be beaten. Fairy tales and video games teach us this. Storytelling is integral to our ability to thrive, and it is our stories that make up the library that we call the collective unconscious. I strongly believe that we could not function without fiction. The collective unconscious is like this universal mind where, as individuals, we can access that information or wisdom and then apply it to our own life. It often speaks to us in the form of metaphors, symbols, and archetypes. In other words, stories. And if we think of humans as a computer, using another metaphor, if we think of humans like computers, then each of us has our own unique programming. Some of us get bugs sometimes and we need to be reformatted from time to time, but we all have access to this internet that we call the collective unconscious. So if you've ever wondered why the best ideas come when you're half asleep or in the shower, you can call it intuition, you can call it psychic messages, you can call it inspiration, and no matter what you call it, it often feels like you're just making it up. But I believe what we're experiencing in these moments is the act of opening ourselves up to the universal consciousness and allowing that information to come through as a guide, revealing to us what we need to know to complete the next act in our story. Now, people often ask me how it's possible to do readings online. Most of my readings are done online these days, and there are some skeptics out there. And so I tell them that it doesn't matter where we are in the world, we're all connected through the collective unconscious. So if you're hiring me to interpret messages for you, it doesn't matter if we're in the same room. I'm not reading your physical body, I'm reading messages that come from a higher source. So I call it the collective unconscious, but it would be akin to like, let my guides connect with your guides, and I'll give you the messages that come to me. So we're connected through the same network. Now, artists in particular play a very significant role in the maintenance of the collective unconscious. Writers, painters, storytellers, filmmakers, all of these art, costume designers, they download the existing information from that higher source, from the collective unconscious. They edit it, they update it, they tailor it for a modern audience, and then they re-upload it for the rest of us to download. So artists and storytellers are extremely important to our human way of life. They are the distributors of information. They're like our internet providers. They showcase these fictional realms that provide us with an opportunity to explore spiritual themes. By exercising our imagination, we're able then to distance ourselves from ourselves and learn something about ourselves in the process from a perspective that we cannot necessarily achieve in the real world. So we get faced with potential dilemmas of morality, for example. You may never come face to face with the same exact crises as your favorite characters, but by living vicariously through a fictional character, you might discover something about yourself. How would you handle that crisis or situation? Would you be as brave? Do you aspire to be as brave? Is that something about yourself that you want to work on because you saw it in a film or read it in a book? Would you be as selfless or as selfish as some of these characters? How do you compare yourself, and does that inspire you to be better? Or is it just something you have learned to acknowledge and accept within yourself? So themes in mythology and fantasy are metaphors for big ideas that can be translated and applied to our own lives here in the real world. Now, Joseph Campbell, my hero, he's a famous scholar of mythology and religion, and he studied myths and stories from all over the world, and he discovered that within every great story ever told, no matter where in the world, what culture, or when, what century, what millennia, inside those stories were the exact same stories. And he named this core story the monomyth, or the hero's journey. So Hercules, Odysseus, King Arthur, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, The Hunger Games, Harry Potter, Gilgamesh, Beowulf, the Gospels of Jesus, these stories all follow the same sequence of events to create an epic tale of a hero and his or her journey. And he went even further. He said that these heroes, whose stories that we tell over and over and over again, are metaphors for the human experience, so we can apply it to ourselves and our own journey. He said, I don't believe people are looking for the meaning of life as much as they're looking for the experience of being alive. And if you want to feel alive and find purpose, then you need to complete a hero's journey, and probably more than once in your own lifetime. So there are a few key components to the hero's journey. First, you have the ordinary world, which is the world that you currently exist, the predictable, the safe, the easy. Sometimes it's boring, the status quo, your comfort zone. That is the ordinary world. And then you have the extraordinary world, which is basically the unknown. Everything that exists outside of what you know and what you're comfortable with. So following the journey now, so we have the two sort of geographic locations, the known and the unknown, the ordinary and the extraordinary. We have steps along this journey. So it kind of goes in a loop, in a circle. First stage is the separation stage. So that's when you leave the ordinary world and step out into the unknown or the extraordinary world. Then you have the descent phase, and this is where all the excitement happens. This is where the bulk of the story, this is where the hero experiences trials, adventure. There's either a literal death or a metaphorical death. There's darkness. This is where they face the villain. they encounter the villain and then they face off with the villain, and then there's a resurrection. And then the last phase of the hero's journey is the return. So after the villain is defeated, the dragon is slain, the hero then returns to the ordinary world with a boon or a treasure to take back. Now, when you are first learning the tarot, students are often introduced to this concept called the Fool's Journey to help them learn the meaning of the trump cards, which is a special suit in the tarot deck. The Fool's Journey is a metaphor for life told in the form of a story. And hey, guess what? It overlaps with the hero's journey. Now, there are a few distinct differences between the Fool's Journey and the hero's journey, but there are a lot of similarities as well. And one thing I find most fascinating is that within both of these journeys, death is in the middle of the journey. It's not at the end. And it's not a literal death either in either case. It's not a literal death, but a metaphorical death. Metaphoric death. In stories, the hero might literally die. Actually, there are a few exceptions where the hero literally dies, but then comes back to life, like Jesus or Sisyphus, for example. Or the hero, most often though, the hero demonstrates a willingness to die. So the hero's purpose is to sacrifice and serve. So you all know that point in any action film where the tough guy has to make a choice to maybe save himself or save humanity or save the city or save some child, some vulnerable little child or whatever. And then he does something like rushes into a burning building, and then the audience watches that building collapse into dust and debris, and everybody gasps, and there's this pause, this moment where we're all left wondering, did he make it? Did he die? Is he coming out alive? Did he save whatever he went in there to save? And of course, the hero comes out a little bit dirty, bloody, possibly limping or hacking from all the smoke and the soot. And that scene is a symbolic rebirth. The guy that went into that building is not the same man who comes out. It's all in the guise of entertainment, but this is actually wisdom coming from the collective unconscious, telling us that we need to sacrifice and serve and let go of who we are so that we can be who we're meant to become. One of the biggest themes in the Harry Potter series was the lesson of embracing death. So rather than running from it, Voldemort, the villain, he was trying to beat death. He was trying to become the master of death. Death was his number one fear, and he wanted immortality. And Harry, the hero, by accident, becomes the master of death instead by rightfully owning all three Deathly Hallows. And he rejects them. He decides he doesn't want them. There's a point within the story where he marches bravely into the forest to face down his arch nemesis Voldemort, believing to his core that he is not walking out again. He saw the vision in Dumbledore's pensive that said that it had to be Voldemort who killed him. It couldn't be anyone else. And so he, has a moment, takes a breath and says, okay, I gotta do what I gotta do. This was meant to be. This is just how it is. And although he's scared, he marches forward anyway towards his own death. In the books, Harry goes to visit his parents' headstones, and on them it is written, the last enemy to be defeated is death. And that is actually a quote from the 1 Corinthians, and it means that there is life after death. There's more waiting us after death, and so there's no need to fear it. Now, in the tarot, you always hear that death is never a literal death. It's a transition. It's always the comforting thing that tarot readers say, oh, don't worry, it's not a real death. It's just a transition. But you cannot have a transition without accepting the inevitable end of something. You can't transition from a caterpillar to a butterfly without accepting that the caterpillar will cease to exist. And once you're a butterfly, you can't go back to being a caterpillar. And that can be really scary for a lot of people. How do you even know you're going to enjoy being a butterfly? You don't. You just have to have faith. Now, the World card in the tarot is another card about endings, but it's much more peaceful. It's akin to the return part of the hero's journey. It's the end of the journey after the death and rebirth and resurrection, after one has demonstrated the courage and the power of human resilience. When the hero comes back with a treasure or some information, information could be the treasure, that they share that knowledge or their abilities or their gift with others in their ordinary world. They give back. And so the World card then is a phase of life where you become a mentor on somebody else's hero's journey while you prepare for your next one. So to give you a real life example to compare death to the World card. So say you have a person in a really bad relationship. They're not happy. They might be in denial of this. Maybe they're telling everybody that they put up with it because they love this person so much. Or maybe they truly believe that this is just the standard for all relationships and it's better to put up with the one you have than either be alone or start over from scratch. But finally, something happens, the last straw gives out, and they're convinced to end it. So there is a death. This person has now accepted their unhappiness or opened their eyes to the fact that they are in an unhealthy or abusive relationship. The relationship is gone. It's dead. There is probably a period of sorrow, anger, and grief. There's usually a period of pain and darkness associated with this breakup, but that is the pain of death and birth, or rebirth specifically. You come out the other side a new person. You come out the other side, this person who went through this breakup has come out now the other side with higher standards of what they want in a relationship. They're not going to tolerate what they used to tolerate. They're going to see the red flags and be out of they're not going to waste their time like they did in the last relationship. Or they learn to accept that being alone is not as scary as they once feared it would be. The World card then coming into play would be their happy ending. So now that they've embraced death, they've freed themselves from this dead-end relationship, they can return to an ordinary world where their life is stable again, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, financially, whatever. They've gotten themselves back on track. They've returned to a state of normalcy, an ordinary world. They're reborn on that other side. So the World card can then be, maybe they've met somebody new and who is wonderful and treats them well, and they have a happy, healthy relationship with this person. And they wouldn't have found that person if they had continued staying in that unhealthy relationship. So it's one possible happy ending. Or perhaps they're happy being alone, or they're satisfied with being alone, and they've discovered now that they have more time to focus on themselves or nurture something amazing within themselves that the old relationship was blocking them from doing. Sucking their energy into this unhealthy relationship with the hope that maybe someday it'll get better. Now I want to talk about the devil, the villain, our inner demons, the dragon that exists inside ourselves, the one that we have to defeat in order to grow. The devil represents something that we're giving our power away to. So some examples of this might be addictions, bad relationships, or maybe even a job that we hate, becoming a slave to a paycheck. The greatest fictional example of the devil, in my humble opinion, is the Goblin King from Labyrinth. There's the scene right at the end where he pleads with Sarah, the heroine, for control and for power. And he says, just let me rule you, fear me, love me, do as I say, and I will be your slave. And the tactics that he uses are, he just in a couple of sentences, he goes through every tactic. If anyone has been in a bad relationship or has seen a friend or a loved one go through one, the tactics that he uses in these few short lines just summarize it so perfectly. He uses guilt, he uses threats, he uses distractions and false promises, all to maintain power and control over her. But she stands up for herself and has this epiphany moment when she says, like a light bulb goes off in her head, and she says, hey, you have no power over me. And the world kind of disintegrates, and that realization brings her back to the ordinary world, back to her home where her brother is safe and everything is as it should be again. Your devil or your demons only have as much power over you as you're willing to give them. Just like the hero's journey, the fool has to accept the potential for death and then face down the biggest challenger of them all. Now, another scary card in the tarot is the Tower. The Tower is the part of the story when all hope seems lost. There is no way for our hero to escape. It looks as though the villain has the upper hand. All security and everything that once made the hero feel safe and brave is now gone. They've been disarmed, overpowered, or trapped. It's just like when Luke Skywalker is trying to destroy the Death Star. He's on a mission, he's got one shot, but he's surrounded by TIE fighters. Or in Jurassic Park, when the humans are trying to escape from the park and they go back, they're back in the lobby and the raptors have been stalking them and chasing them, and now they have them completely surrounded. So they're blocking all the exits. The humans are huddled in this little, back to back looking around, and there's raptors on every side, and they're all looking for a way out. There's no way out. Or when Frodo and Sam have made it to the mouth of Mount Doom, and Frodo is too corrupted by the ring's power, and he's refusing to let it go. So people in the tarot will tell you that the Tower card is the scariest card in the deck. Worse than death, worse than the devil. It's when you feel like all hope is gone. But it's also a necessary one. It is a metaphor for circumstances that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy, but you become so grateful for those experiences after the fact. It's a tough lesson for many people to be grateful for the shitty things that happen to them. Because if your world hadn't come crashing down, you would never have found the gems in the rubble. In other words, the good things that were revealed as a direct result of this event. So some examples of gems in the rubble are long-lasting and strong friendships, or the ability to help or save other people, or qualities within you that you didn't even know were there, that were forced to come out in order to cope or survive this situation. Opportunities, things that no one would have paid attention or noticed or known about you, that now people are extending a hand or thinking of you, or you've just become on their radar because of this negative experience. So things that wouldn't have happened otherwise that now have happened because you went through a tragedy. The opportunity for a better life. So for example, here's an example. If you get laid off from your job and you've got maybe you've got no savings or nothing, and you're like, holy crap, what am I going to do? This is devastating. How am I going to support myself? How am I going to support my family? How am I going to pay my bills? And it's awful and scary and frightening. But maybe you get your dream job. Something, you're looking for new work now. You wouldn't have looked if you had kept your old job. But because you got laid off, you were forced into a situation or a circumstance, and now you're even better off than you were before. And that would never have happened had you been able to keep your previous job. So the next card I want to talk about is the Star card. So not a scary card, but one that I feel is important to that group of scary cards, like Death and the Devil and the Tower. It has to come packaged with this group, in my opinion. Joseph Campbell would have called this card the rescue from without. If we're going to put it on the hero's journey flowchart, the Star would be the rescue from without. The Star card represents the return of hope, a change in the stars, a change of fate, a wish come true. So going back to our example of the Tower, Luke Skywalker, he's surrounded by TIE fighters. He's not able to destroy the Death Star. But along comes Han Solo, who we haven't seen in multiple acts, with his Millennium Falcon. He shoots down the TIE fighters, gets them off Skywalker's back, and Luke can now complete his mission and do what he went in there to do. Our Jurassic Park crew, they're surrounded by the raptors. There's no way out. Well, all of a sudden, unexpectedly, in stomps a giant T-Rex who chomps down on one of the raptors. The other 3 raptors go after the T-Rex now to save their pack mate, and the humans have an opportunity to escape. Frodo wanted to keep that ring, but not as much as Gollum did, because here he comes out of nowhere, barreling in completely unexpectedly, grabs the ring from Frodo, and tumbles off the edge of the cliff into the fiery pits, destroying the ring and himself in the process. Ta-da! Hope has been restored. So these fictional events are there to remind us that no matter how devastating a blow we might suffer, there's always a way to recover and rebuild. Sometimes we need to take the reins and put on our big girl panties and fix things ourselves, but sometimes miracles happen for us. There's a quote by Will Smith, and he says, "The best things in life are on the other side of terror." So all that agony and anxiety from the buildup of should I or shouldn't I disappears the moment you jump. So the moment you take that leap of faith, the moment you cross that threshold into the unknown, into the extraordinary world, all the fear goes away. Our willingness to be afraid is directly proportional to the amount of happiness we can get. So if we're not willing to be afraid and go forward anyway, then we can't grow. And if we can't grow, then we can't be happy. It's a paradox. Tim Ferriss, the author of The 4-Hour Workweek, has some amazing advice. This was life-changing for me, so I wanted to pass it on to you. He said when you're in moments where you want something but fear is holding you back, all you need to do is ask yourself 3 questions. Question number 1, what is the worst that could happen? And Dr. Phil says that if you're going to go down that what if road, you might as well take it all the way to the end. What if? Answer the question. Then what? Then what? Then what? Take it all the way till it goes as far as it can go. What is the worst thing that could happen? Question number 2, what can I do to prevent the worst from happening? Is there something you could do to minimize the damage or prevent the worst, or some contingency that you could put in place? Question number 3, if the worst happened anyway, what can you do to recover? I tell you, once you get through those 3 questions, you're going to feel a lot more courageous. And sometimes I'll even ask the tarot these questions. So tarot readers, if you're looking for a risky business, a fear-based tarot spread, here it is. What's the worst that could happen? What could I do to prevent the worst from happening? Card number 3, if the worst happened anyway, what could I do to rebuild? So I am a much bigger risk taker. I might not be rich yet, but I can definitely attest to being a hell of a lot happier than I have been in the past. So the next time you get a tarot reading and you see any of these scary cards that I mentioned, the Devil, Death, the Tower, it's a sign. Take it as a sign that you're on the right path. You're on track to completing your journey and coming out the other end a hero of your own story. These events are not happening to you, they're happening for you. So simple adjustments to your language can have a significant impact to your mindset, your positivity, and your ability to be brave and move forward. You get back what you put out. So putting out positive vibes, keep saying, why is this happening for me? Another language tip is to stop saying, I have to. I have to go to the grocery store. I have to pay my bills. I have to go to the dentist. Instead of saying I have to, say I get to. I get to go to work today. I get to pay my bills. I get to, I don't know, complete the sentence, whatever it is for you, because that reminds you, that rephrasing automatically comes with a reminder that you have something to be grateful for. Now, I love to use a lot of pop culture and mythological metaphors and archetypes in my readings to help explain the messages that are coming through for people. So my favorite questions for clients are ones about making life decisions, reaching goals, finding purpose, and guiding them on their journey so that they too can become the heroes of their own story. So if you're feeling a little stuck on your current chapter, check with the tarot, see what it has to say. It is a great tool to check in with your own intuition, your bliss, and give you the homework that you need to get through the next trial in your journey. So if you're interested in a reading with me, I'm available for email readings as well as video chat readings. You can book from anywhere. Just either send me an email or go to my website, AlisonSpokes.ca. I will put the link in the description below. And until next time, guys, stay shiny and keep sparkling. Bye.